Okay, so talking about finishing up the notes there from 6.2, activation energy. Whenever we're talking about chemical reactions, whether they're exergonic or endergonic, all chemical reactions require a certain amount of activation energy in order to take place because this activation energy gets reactants past that transition state, which is a destabilization state or a destabilized state of the bonds that hold those reactants together, or it creates a situation where the reactants are more likely to interact, depending upon if you're breaking something down or building it. So activation energy is what's required to start a chemical reaction. How fast it's going to take, how fast or the rate at which this exergonic reaction might proceed depends upon how much activation energy is required. So if you require a large amount of activation energy to get past that transition state, then your reaction is going to proceed much more slowly. In order to increase the rate of reaction, that can happen two ways. Number one, increase the energy of the molecules that are involved in the reaction, so like by stirring or adding heat, which are neither feasible ways inside our cells, or by lowering the amount of activation energy that would be required. And so here you have two reactions, one catalyzed, one uncatalyzed, and you can see what happens to the activation energy hump when a catalyst is present. So a catalyst is a molecule, a substance that can create a situation that lowers the activation energy of our reactants. It can influence the bonds. It puts stress on the bonds, making them able to reach that transition state more closely. It does not, however, like reverse an endergonic reaction and make it spontaneous. It can't. You cannot. A catalyst can't do that, but it can speed up the rate. It also has no impact on how much product is made, the proportion of reactants to products. It doesn't, take small amount of reactant and make a large amount of product. Whatever goes in is what comes out. A catalyst will just speed up that rate of reaction because it lowers the amount of activation energy that is required. And so here again is that image. So you can see that when activation energy is lowered because we have a catalyzed reaction in that pink line, that catalyzed reaction can proceed more quickly because it will not take as much energy to get past that. And once it gets past, the crest of that activation energy hill, it will just proceed in an exergonic fashion. So when energy is required, though, ATP is our source of energy, adenosine triphosphate. It is the energetic currency of the cell. We have talked about its structure before, right? Adenosine triphosphate. It's made up of ribose, which is a sugar, adenine, which is a nitrogenous base, right? It still is a component of DNA as well. And it's made up of 3-phosphate. So ATP is actually just a nucleotide that's triple phosphated, if you will. So it has 3 phosphate groups, and those 3 phosphate groups are where the energy of ATP is found. Because those phosphate groups are all negatively charged, they don't want to be together, so those bonds are unstable because they're kind of being forced there. So ATP is 3 phosphates, a DP or diphosphate is 2, and a MP is 1 phosphate, which has like very little energy, but AMP is utilized in cell communication for other purposes, not just as a part of the ATP-ADP cycle. So there's our chemical structure of ATP, ribose, adenine, and our 3 phosphate groups. Now the ATP cycle, basically when you have ATP, in order to get the energy from it or to get the energy out of it to use it for another purpose, we have to hydrolyze ATP. Remember, hydrolysis always means breakdown, whereas dehydration or condensation always means building. So ATP hydrolysis is the process that will make our endergonic reactions take place. So by adding a water molecule and breaking off that 3rd phosphate group, that releases some energy in order to fuel an endergonic reaction. So the reaction of ATP hydrolysis coupled with an endergonic reaction results in actually an exergonic reaction, and it would be then spontaneous by looking at the delta G results. So we always couple the use of the hydrolysis of ATP with an endergonic reaction. Now, ATP is energy, but it's not long-term energy storage. It breaks down too quickly, no shelf life there. The better way to store energy is in a fat or carbohydrate, or in our liver as glycogen, in our muscles as glycogen, or in our adipose tissue as fat, and then converting that into glucose, which then gets broken down into ATP. That's kind of the better process. We can only store, like it says there, only up to a few seconds worth of ATP in our cells. But the process to make it is very quick. And so here is our hydrolysis of ATP, right? ATP and water will break off a phosphate group. We use that released energy in that phosphate group for some kind of endergonic cellular process that needs to take place. My product there would be ADP and a lone phosphate group, but we don't get rid of that stuff. Remember, in cell respiration, we just recharge that ADP and that phosphate group back together using energy from an exergonic process like cell respiration.